Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, a podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199 Agency, a marketing agency working in sustainable commodities. And with me...
Hi, it's Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates.
And in this episode, we're delighted to welcome a very special guest, Manuel Davila from DAABON UK, global leaders in sustainable agriculture. And continuing the theme of this series, we're going to be talking about EUDR. Specifically, we'll be talking about palm oil and EUDR, what Manuel and DAABON think about the legislation, and what DAABON's doing about it.
But to start off, Manuel, DAABON has got quite a significant history in sustainable palm oil, and particularly in the year where our RSPO turns 20, which is pretty scary for those of us that have been around in the industry for some time. Do you want to start off by just telling us a little bit about the sustainability journey and the history of DAABON?
Yes, thank you very much for bringing me into the show. Good morning to the audience and Barnaby and Judith. So to give you some background of the last 20 or even 30 years of our history with palm and the story of my family, because it's a family business. When we jumped into palm was around the year 64, 65. Back then we were growing bananas, cotton, and rice, and palm seemed like a very good option in terms of return on investment as agriculture. But it wasn't until the 80s that my family decided to try out organics for the first time, as it was becoming this new alternative to conventional farming. And my grandfather was a man that loved agriculture, and he did not like pesticides or synthetic fertilizers. He saw this as shortcuts. You know, it makes farmers forget how to farm with nature. So we gave it a shot. And it turned to be very, very, very successful very early on in the early 90s. So from the get-go, our mentality has always been to work with nature, not against it. So by the time that sustainability became a major topic worldwide, we're talking now the early 2000s, we were very, very geared up to what was coming. For us, it was a very easy transition to do in our nurseries, in our composting fields, in our high carbon value areas, our HCVs, and also in our agricultural harvesting practices. Also add to that because all of our plantations are in Colombia, and Colombia has been a country that has been suffering for 60 years of civil conflict, there's been a lot of areas of violence that has left people without many choices for work, and they end up selling their plots of land. And rather than us buying these small plots of land, we've helped them to unify and create co-ops in which we would buy the product for them and teaching them about organic agriculture, fair trade, RSPO certified product. So we also have a very, very big social impact in our communities because we helped create co-ops that leverage out of all the certifications that we have, and we bring them into the system to include them into what seems something very daunting for a small farmer. Now you fast track this to now the mid 2010s, 2020s, and we started to see that people started now talking about carbon footprint. People now starting to talk a little bit more about what is beyond just a certification logo. What are the actual impacts and why are we doing this? Then we start the journey into, okay, let's calculate our footprint at the extraction facility, at the farm level, at the refinery level. And we've been working very, very hard, and we've deployed some projects that have been very successful, such as the Clean Development Mechanism, where we capture the palm oil mill effluents, or POM for short, where this anaerobic bacteria excrete methane gas, and this we trap it in an anaerobic digester, remove the sulfur, and thus we have gas that we can run our facilities in. So we haven't paid an electricity bill for almost 12 years, which is quite nice, but also very good for the environment. That has allowed us for us to claim that our crude palm coming out of our facility is carbon neutral, or sometimes carbon negative, depending on the years. But that's just the first part of the chain, the crude. Then we have to transport it and refine it and package it into ingredients. We're working on that part right now. But now you bring it into a regulatory environment such as the EUDR, and you ask me, "Are you ready? Are we there?" I say, "Yes, we're quite ready." Not only on our fulfillment of the legislation, but going more broadly into including the people in the back of the supply chain, such as the smallholders in the co-ops, having not only fulfilling the legislation requirements such as traceability and insurance of zero deforestation, but going beyond that into having an holistic approach in circular economy into what we use in the farm, how we actually deliver the product to inset all of the carbon that we're producing while we're making this back into the soil.
So, I mean, that's a thanks for that, Manuel. That was a great intro. A nice story about DAABON. In terms of, you mentioned EUDR there. Obviously, that's the big topic in Europe at the moment. It sounds like you preparing it for you hasn't been such a big challenge. But what are your thoughts on the legislation as a whole?
I wouldn't assume that it's not a very big challenge. It's been a very big effort throughout many years, but we had headwinds to start with before it became legislation. You see, that's the difference. People are just reacting now that it's become legislation. We've actually flipped it around for many years, and we used it as a differentiation factor. Yeah. So when we went to market, we said, look, we actually bring this product and it has these unique selling points. Okay. And we use the sustainability argument. We use the organic. So now that it's becoming a legislation, we're well ahead of it. But we worked quite hard to get there. And we had a lot of internal family conversations about this is becoming very costly. And yes, we're charging the right price for it because the yields are quite different. But does the market appreciate all the effort that we're putting? And in many cases, we had yes, but in many other cases, we had no's. And it became very frustrating because people, and that's where the greenwashing environment comes around. And now I'm actually quite curious what's going to happen now the legislation comes forth. So to your question with regards to what is my opinion with the other players in the legislation, I would believe that there will be very few who actually fulfill the legislation in such a short period of time. Talking specifically about palm oil. Mm-hmm. When we talk about other commodities, I have more doubts than an affirmation that they will be able to do it because we've had a head start of almost 20 years of scrutiny, while the other commodities haven't had that, let's say, chance to examine their supply chain and be able to deliver what the legislation requires.
Yeah. And I think that's so right, isn't it? I think, when just in general, when we've been talking about it, is that palm oil is so advanced and yet so many other of the commodities are way behind. And I think that certainly for me, the concern is about smallholders. And you touched on smallholders and how important they are. Do you think that's going to be a big barrier, particularly in other parts of the world? About, do you think smallholders will get excluded because of this legislation?
I have no doubts that it will happen. In our example where we had the co-ops because they were created because of a particular situation in my nation, and they've already been part of the system. They've already been trained. We give them technical agricultural assistance and we get them certified into our umbrella certification. That is not the case in many other parts of the world, how it works. Thus making it very difficult for them to be able to financially take the investment on at the beginning and then see the return into the market. What would my expectations be is that the large palm players will be able to fulfill this, and specifically in their plantations to give all the traceability and all the assurance of zero deforestation. And by low-hanging fruits, those companies will focus first in their supply chains and then seek more volume out of other ones. And I think they put them last in queue because those are probably the most difficult ones to fulfill. So I would have questions towards a big organization in Malaysia called FELDA, because FELDA is the largest palm company of co-ops and smallholders. And when I was in Malaysia not that long ago, they were still battling through a lot of questions that they found very difficult to fulfill.
Yeah.
And their mission is to actually create employment and decent lifestyle for their farmers. So I find it very hard for them entering the European Union and actually ticking all the boxes.
Yeah, no, definitely. And from a UK perspective, I mean, I know we talk a lot about the EUDR, but the UK has its own legislation, but just seems to be not on the radar. What's your reaction to the UK version?
Like Brexit, surprise. I'd say it will try to follow very closely what the European legislation will dictate. So far, my understanding is going to be less stringent, but more inclusive in terms of the number of derivatives that are coming into the picture to be regulated. Therefore, I call that business friendly,
right,
rather than compliant friendly. We still have to hear a little bit more from DEFRA to fully understand.
Do you think that's going to have an impact on availability of those derivatives?
I think that there's going to be one derivative that's going to suffer more than other derivatives, and I think that the one that's going to suffer the most are derivatives that are based on byproduct production rather than main production. So a clear example of this is the production of glycerin. Worldwide, when we produce glycerin, we don't produce it because we're aiming to produce glycerin. We produce it as a byproduct result of producing other things, such as soaps, biodiesel, or other chemical reactions. So if this is a byproduct, then it's not main focus. So it's just always a leftover. But then you have to fix the other side of the equation in terms of its economic feasibility for the glycerin to actually comply, making the glycerin a very difficult component. And glycerin is in so many products that we don't even notice that, and we take it for granted. So I'd say those type of products, they are going to be scarce. They're going to be in high demand. That might trigger the use of glycerin from other vegetable oils. For example, soya oil-based glycerin, and those soya beans will probably come out of Brazil, and they will be coming from dubious places, which we will have to do the same traceability exercise. And thus comes the question, how ready is the soya industry for traceability purposes? So that would be my availability concern. The rest of the products in the short run, it might be a little bit bullish, but I think that there will be product.
So I guess with the other side of availability is the price. What impact are these pieces of legislation going to have on the price?
I can share with you a couple of conversation with numbers of some feeling and indication of some people. Because for my surprise that I'm always in market buying and selling, RSPO premiums that should reflect the sustainability and traceability of these products would hover in the world of palm oil around $60 to $40 a metric ton. And in terms of palm kernel, sometimes in the region of $200 to $250 a metric ton. Now, what I heard in the last conference that I visited in Kuala Lumpur is that the EUDR is so stringent in terms of the traceability part, not so much on the audit of deforestation. The traceability part is the hardest part, that they're looking at a number around the $300 a metric ton. So it is even more than what the RSPO premium is trading at. That could only indicate one thing, which is the availability is going to be shorter. Less people will be able to supply it. So it's not going to become a buyer's market, but rather a seller's market. How long will that last for? Well, economics will always motivate people to actually create that product so they have a little bit more return, and then will create a little bit more equilibrium. But we're yet to see that.
And when you're saying $300 per ton, are you talking about palm oil or palm kernel?
They didn't go into the specifics of it, but my feeling when I was having that conversation is that was for palm. So it's going to go from 60 to 300. And it sounds like a gigantic jump. It is a very gigantic jump for a conventional product. But we will start to see the buying spree towards the third quarter of this year and the fourth quarter of this year to see how well people are covered and documents come through. I think that people won't be spooked until the first fine is placed on a company that misbehaves.
Yeah. Guess that's a big question, isn't it, in terms of how stringently it is enforced, especially in the first years?
Yes, it's a European Union. It's 27 nations with 27 different authorities overseeing different ports. And the legislation says that each nation must find the agency to enforce it. And then the agency has to see fit the interpretation of the law to enforce it. And we know by history how different nations in the European Union work and have expectations of, actually pursuing a punitive measure with a financial claim to it. Nations such as Germany, Netherlands, probably Denmark, Belgium will be probably the first to actually move to actually find somebody, while more Mediterranean nations will be a little bit more, my expectation, patient, and would just do a slap in the hand and it's like, just fix it for next time. So we might see the first cases come through those nations.
It leads me on to thinking about how palm oil is perceived, because certainly when you're talking about Europe, so many countries have moved away. Spain, Italy in particular, has never been very keen on palm oil. And yet the EU is putting these really strong legislation in place. And I think for me, people talk a lot about walking away from palm oil and saying, we've got a policy that we say we shouldn't be using palm oil. Yet palm oil is in everything, and I think that's what people miss. What's your perception about palm oil in Europe now? And do you think it's as negative as perhaps the three of us feel? I think we've been in the game long enough to realise that palm is not seen as a positive image.
So the image reputation is still damaged. You walk around with the younger generations and they just are repeating machines from what they hear without understanding what's at the back. I even have an anecdote from actually being called to school to teach the children about that, and they would say, yeah, but my mommy says it's bad. It's like, okay, how to explain this?
Without saying your mommy's wrong.
Yes. Yes, exactly, because there's a conversation to be held. Okay, so there are different elements to this. The first one is to understand the function that palm plays in our food system and why food technologists and product developers decide to use it in the first place. On the functionality side, the main reason why large manufacturers really like this product is because it's a semi-solid. Okay, when you look at the options in the family of oils, your sunflowers, your soyas, your coconuts, butter, lard, that would include the animal ones as well, it's actually quite difficult to find something that contains a good amount of liquid and a good amount of solid, so you have different textures. And those different textures allow you to do many different things. The second element is that it's year-wide available. Okay, it's not a seasonal crop. And because it has the highest yield per production per hectare, it is economically feasible for many different products worldwide, making food lower cost and accessible to many people around the world. Lastly, once you add this ingredient into your supply chain, it is quite stable in terms of shelf life. It is quite easy to manage it supply chain wise. You can get it in many different presentations in different parts of the world. So it is an easy supply chain solution for the actual delivery of the good in these type of food systems that we have worldwide, where we need availability of raw ingredients all the time and actually manage the price risk, the supply chain risk, the functionality risk. So that's one of the main reasons why we have it. The next element that has to do with where in the world it's used more than others, and the reputation it carries. And I get this as a person that's been in agriculture, is that if you're a farmer and in your part of the world, you can only grow certain crops, and then a crop from another part of the world comes and is being imported and is, let's say, displacing your market, you're going to have to battle. Okay, and that would be the case of the European territory, where this continent is an oil seed territory, where you have soya, you have rapeseed, you have sunflower, and you have olives. So those agriculture players will try to battle through, and I don't want to be calling my cartel move, but they will act in a way that they will lobby together and say, hey, this is our financial interest. We're from this nation. We would like to have some protection. And I completely understand that. You can see that translation in import levies and export duties with other nations. So it will be for no surprise that they managed to pass in the legislation, the Renewables Energy Directive, where they're taking out palm from the biodiesel use inside the European Union. Why? Because they want to put in the rapeseed, thus driving more economical benefits from the actual local labor rather than the international labor. So when you have scandals such as deforestation scandals that started, let's say, in the 90s and escalated into the creation of the RSPO in 2004, and any other event that would occur after that, those would be echoed with megaphones by all of these actors because it would trigger them more demand. So you have to get your head around understanding the why people will push for that. Nations such as France is quite loud in that aspect. You go to the supermarket shelves and you see a lot of product without palm. The confusion, or let's say the argument that consumers have are, okay, so the product is without palm, why? Because it's bad for me? Is it bad for the environment? So there's a lot of questions to be held, and the conversations need to be explained because it's not a straightforward one. You need to understand that it wasn't a problem of the crop per se, it's the decisions people took with the crop at the level of expansion in one part of the world, which is Southeast Asia. So then the question is, okay, so where can I get this crop without having that impact? That's a conversation you can have. Also, I've heard arguments like, well, do you need that ingredient in this food item? And then it comes back to the first argument that I explained to you, which is the functionality part. A lot of people have tried to re-engineer their actual products to remove palm, and they've seen the impacts of them, and they've had different textures at what they expect. So again, do you want a high performing item on the supermarket shelf or not? You know, I'll give you some clear examples for you to picture them in your head. When you fry, because I'm going to talk about liquid oils, when you fry goods in things such as sunflower, rape, or soya, or even olive, these are highly liquid oils. So that means that after you finish the frying, the good, let it be a donut, let it be a fish, let it be a chicken, anything will still drip oil and will look very oily. And even if you touch it, it feels very oily to your fingers. Okay, it absorbs quite a bit of oil throughout the frying session. When you do this in a more solid fat, such as, let's say, lard, palm, coconut, palm kernel, these are more solid fats. So that means that when you take it out, they harden, so they don't feel oily to your fingers. Okay, and they don't absorb as much oil. So again, it is the functionality part that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Now, people get used to different things. For example, in the US, they're champions in soya. So people are actually used to the flavor of soya when they eat food, and when they leave the United States, they say, it doesn't taste like the fried chicken I have at home. Yeah. So then it becomes like a flavor profile. It happens the same way when we go to Disney World and we try to fry food. It's like, it tastes really funny over here.
Yeah.
Yes. So there is a lot of reputation that needs to be explained why we got there. But at the same time that you have to explain that, you have to explain all the work that's being done. Okay, fix it. Okay, because people are just seeing and say, "Oh, I'm not going to deal with it. Get it off my list. Get it off my shelves." And it's like, well, let's understand the implications at the back, because there's a reason why it came in.
I think people look for easy binary solutions. In the digital world, they're looking for is it good or bad? And the media narrative for my entire career, the 15 plus years writing about sustainable palm oil, is that media narrative has naturally been bad. So can you blame, I guess, the food industry for looking to engineer palm out of their products? And I guess the next part of the question is, what can we do about that?
The question about the blame part of taking it out, that's an interesting one. I think if you think about the activity that each player does in the value chain, so there's the activity of farming, there's the activity of extraction, there's the activity of refining, activity of packaging, delivery, and then you have the activity of cooking or manufacturing. And the people who are cooking and manufacturing, all they want to do is cook and manufacture. They don't want to deal with everybody else at the back. I just want to make sure my biscuit tastes good and it's always perfect on shelf. I don't want to have any recalls. I want my brand to be really good and the product to be really nice. So if I would put myself in their shoes, they're just doing a risk assessment. They're doing a risk assessment, and when they do the risk assessment, they must see, all the bullet points. So we have to make sure of this, we have to make sure of that. And somebody must say, look, you know what, let's just not do it and try to simplify it. The ricochet, the ricochet consequences of that would actually be suffering a little bit on functionality, suffer a little bit on availability of the new raw material because it's less available than the other raw materials. You may have price surges such as the one that we saw after the invasion in Ukraine, where palm was much more available than any other oil.
Yeah.
So I thought that particular world event, even though it was tragic, it made people think a lot. It's like, okay, even though we've started to reformulate, we really need to think about the other consequences. We have another example, such as Iceland supermarket using this as a marketing stunt and then having no product in the freezers. Yeah. It's like, again, really think about what's going to be the consequence in the long term. So it's not that I will play the blame game, but it's just I understand where they're coming from. And I think that the risk assessments that they're doing are very narrow in the scope of the supply chain. And I just suggest go a little bit further out and play a longer game to see if that actually is going to play out.
And if they think about the sustainability side of it, because in that risk assessment, the sustainability side seems to be almost forgotten. The reason that from a kind of forward perspective that they're doing this is from a sustainability perspective. We're stopping palm because palm is bad. But the reality of it is that it depends on what else they're using as to what that sustainability impact is. And it could be significantly worse.
Yes, that could definitely be the case. You could have a worse choice. But more interesting is the choice that you left the table. You see, you have been part of a supply chain taking this product. You have now found out that at the back of this chain, there's been an issue. And you have two choices in front of you: either help to fix the problem or leave the table and go somewhere else. I do not see in any scenario where leaving the table fixes absolutely anything. Okay? Because what that person at the back of the supply chain is going to be left with is hungry children at a family table saying, I still need to feed them, I need to sell this. And when you look at the number of buyers, if we say each country is one buyer, so you have 192 buyers, I'd say just a bunch of around maybe 27, maybe 35 countries actually do something about sustainability. The other lot doesn't really want anything around. They just want cheap food. So basically, if one of those players stand up from the table, like would be the case of Norway, okay, where they said there's going to be no palm in our nation. Okay, so that person left the table. So what's going to happen? we're going to put more oil in another place where they don't care. So at the fundamentals at the back, it's just like you leave the table and you can't tell us what to do.
Does that bring us back to EUDR? Is there a potential impact of that doing the exact same thing?
I have a feeling that might be somewhat of the case. We've already seen evidence of that with the biofuel mandate once the RED Act came in, where Indonesia in particularly said, okay, if the European Union wants to get us out of there, and Malaysia has a WTO claim that they just won against the European Union, I say, okay, I'll just produce more biodiesel here. It is a nation of almost 300 million people, and they can just produce more biodiesel. So, and once they produce it there, then you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah. I think that's what people forget, though, isn't it? Is that, Indonesia is now the biggest producer and the biggest user, and it will just do what it wants. And so, I often talk about the influence about, buying RSPO and being positive about palm. It's influencing the rest of the world. I suppose, playing devil's advocate, do you think that people might have in Europe more confidence if they're following the legislation? So actually, by having this legislation, and particularly for the EU with this geospatial data that's required, that they will have more confidence in what they're buying, and it I actually don't think this, but actually could increase the amount of palm oil because people see it as coming from good places. I'm not sure about that statement, but what do you think?
I have given it some thought. I believe that logic would dictate that if it's legislation and there are punitive measures, that means that every single kilo or liter of these commodities coming in are kosher. Everything is good. Everything is fine. So what's the concern about? Now, that was the original intention of the RSPO, to actually do it as a voluntary effort.
Mm-hmm.
We know that any effort is a challenge that always has room for improvement. Okay? And people make mistakes, let it be deliberate or undeliberately, but something happens. And thus the credibility of the system falls. So if that happened to the RSPO as a voluntary measure, I would like to see what's going to happen when it becomes law. Okay? To see how credible the system is. Thus, then the enforcement of the different nations in the European Union showcasing that they're actually doing their job. So I'm actually curious to see which nations are actually going to be able to tell their population, say, we are guaranteeing and putting our word to it, that every kilo and every liter of these 7 commodities that we have here are now causing deforestation. And if we catch anybody, these are the measurements, are going to be publicly shamed. Will that trigger more consumption of them? Maybe in the long run. Maybe in the long run, because then there's no questions like what's the problem using them? Then will come questions around, well, it's consuming more of them sustainable in terms of per capita consumption, okay? And the expansion of different area lands. That's another conversation. What is the actual normal consumption that we will have per capita, assuming the population in these nations, in these top 35 nations, are deemed to decrease? Okay. In other parts of the world, it might continue to increase a little bit, but in all those other nations, we're now seeing that leveling. So now we're talking about the per capita consumption, and, as gross income per capita increases, we usually consume a little bit more indulgences and more fatty food. So I'm a firm believer that the system will be really, really good for what we need, but it's about believing in the system. If you believe that the system works, then you actually have no argument about that. If you become suspicious or have conspiracy theories like many of us had in the last couple of years about what's going on in the world, then it becomes very hard. We're yet to see next year, and I think that unfortunately us humans just believe after seeing. So we have to see an example of somebody being punished, and then we'll believe that the system's working.
So, I looking at the time, I think we're kind of coming to the end of our time available. But I've got one question that I'm going to spring on you, which is EUDR coming in on time and in full?
On time and in full. Oh, okay, that has to do with the delay. So the article that came out in the Financial Times was indicating more about the delay on country risk. Okay, the delay on country risk has nothing to do with the actual deadline of implementation. And I hope that people who have read that financial article were not confused about what they were reading. All it says is that all the countries will be measured the same. Over time, they will be moving it, but you still have to comply with the regulation. Now, will the big food companies actually have the lobby power in the next quarter? Because I know that there are going to be a couple of meetings from here until the middle of the year to call for a delay. It could still happen. I'm not going to say no. It could definitely still happen. It shows you how unprepared these companies are. But then that will then go into the first argument of the whole podcast, which is the bullishness of the prices going up, because people will start buying and buying and buying oil. That's like, it has to be traceable. It has to be this. So my cues are going to be the premiums. That's for me understanding what is actually going on.
So a politician's answer, that was a maybe, a strong maybe.
Yes, a very strong maybe. It's very difficult to say. Very difficult.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much for your time, Manuel. Yeah. That's been really good.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
And thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sustainable Commodities podcast. If you'd like to find out more about Manuel or DAABON, please go and check out their website. And we'll join you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.